Hey everyone, welcome back to Stadium Stats. Today we'll be looking at Wild Card Weekend of the NFL schedule, and then I'll be going into my power rankings of the playoff teams. So without further ado, let's get into it. Our first matchup, starting with the AFC, is the 7-seeded Broncos taking on the 2-seeded Bills. The Broncos, they're coming off a major win over the Chiefs' backups, 38-0, in a game where Bo Nix played fantastic, Cortland Sutton played fantastic, the offense was firing, they just could not be stopped. And it was a win-and-in scenario for the third week in a row, and they lost the past two, but they were able to secure the win here and make the playoffs. The Bills, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Patriots in a game where they sat basically all of their starters. Not really much to be said about the Bills in that scenario, but the Bills are a very good team. And truthfully, I'm not too sure that the Broncos stand much of a chance with a rookie quarterback going against that Bills defense, which hasn't been fantastic, but has had its ups and downs. It's definitely had its bright moments. That being said, though, I don't think the Broncos offense will be able to keep up with the Bills offense, which has been unbelievable this year. Josh Allen's been playing at an MVP level and has really carried that offense. They also have a really good run game, though, and their pass game and every part of that offense is working. So I'm going to pick the Bills to win this one in what I think will be a pretty difficult matchup for the Broncos. I'm not going to count them out, but I really don't think they stand much of a chance. So I'm going with the Bills. Moving on in the AFC, we've got a matchup between the 6-seeded Steelers and the 3-seeded Ravens. The Ravens, they're coming off a win over the Browns in a game where Lamar played pretty well. He ended the season with over 40 passing touchdowns. He's the first quarterback in NFL history to have over 40 passing touchdowns, over 4,000 yards passing, and over 800 yards rushing. He playing at what I think is the MVP level. I think he deserves it more than anyone. And they were able to come away with a major win over the division rival Browns. That being said, the Browns are not a good team, so it wasn't that impressive of a win. And Lamar did drop his overall passer rating, going from the second highest passer rating in a season of all time down to the fourth. But all things considered, it was a pretty good game for the Ravens. The Steelers, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Bengals in a game where they did not play great. They are now on, I believe, a 4-game losing streak, and it has been quite the slide for them. They, at one point, were in control of their own destiny and could have had, and were in contention for the 1 seed even. That being said, they lost that out pretty quickly and now have lost the division and are going to be a wild card team playing in Baltimore. I think the Ravens should have this. I do think Lamar struggles a lot more in the postseason, but I think he should be able to get a win here. I think that this has been his best season of his NFL career, and if he's not able to get at least one win in the playoffs, I don't know when he ever would. So I'm going to pick the Ravens to win this week, and I think because it's a divisional matchup, it should be pretty close, but I think the Ravens come away with the win because their offense is too good for the Steelers' defense to handle, and their defense has been improving week in and week out. Finally, in the AFC, we've got our matchup between the 5-seeded Chargers and the 4-seeded Texans. The Texans, they're coming off a game in which they won 23-14 against the Titans, confirming the Titans get the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. But the Texans, they mainly played backups. They played pretty well on offense, but they've really struggled this season. C.J. Stroud's had a crazy sophomore slump, and they've just haven't looked the same and have not looked up to their potential. Their defense, however, has been fantastic most of the season. So I do think that gives them a lot of hope for the playoffs because their defense is a top unit in the league. The Chargers, on the other hand, they're coming off a win over the Raiders in a game where they played pretty well on offense. Quentin Johnston had the best game of his career, having almost 200 yards. Justin Herbert had 350 passing yards and multiple passing touchdowns. They played a great game. Ladd McConkey continues to really impress, and their offense looked really good. Their defense also has looked good most of the season, but has had a few occasions where it's been exposed, such as the Buccaneers game a few weeks back. And I really do think the fact that the Raiders scored as much as they did against the Chargers does say something about the Chargers' defense, because the Raiders' offense is not very good. But the Chargers still won big and were able to come away with that win, which is all that mattered, and clinched them the 5 seed. I do think this will be a very close matchup, arguably one of the closest of the entire wildcard weekend. I'm really uncertain with my pick here. However, I am going to go with the Chargers to win this, because the Texans just have not looked like themselves this year. I think the Texans are a good team and they have a lot of potential, but I don't see them living up to it because they haven't for most of the season. So why would they suddenly get it all together here? I really just don't see that happening. They're missing 2 of their top 3 receivers in Stephon Diggs and Tank Dell, who are both out for season, and that offense has really struggled without them. Nico Collins is still a great player, but outside of that, and Joe Mixon, they don't really have a lot going for them on offense, especially with C.J. Stroud having a down year. So I'm going to go with the Chargers, who have really impressed in recent weeks, and I think their defense might be too much for the Texans' offense to handle. Looking over at the NFC side, we're going to start off with the 7-seeded Packers taking on the 2-seeded Eagles. The Packers, they're coming off a loss to the Bears in a game where they did not play well. Neither team really played great on offense, but unfortunately for the Packers, Jordan Love got hurt, Josh Jacobs got hurt, and even their backup quarterback Malik Willis got hurt. Christian Watson also got hurt, and his injury seems to be more severe. Still uncertain at the time of recording what his injury is, so I'm not going to state anything, but it's not looking likely that he'll play in this game against the Eagles. The Packers, they really struggled in that game. The play calling wasn't great. They didn't have much of a pass game. The run game looked fantastic, but their injuries really were too much for them to overcome, and their defense and special teams did fail them by allowing the Bears a punt return touchdown and the Bears to score on offense as much as they did, seeing as the Bears had struggled on offense for most of the season. The Packers did have an interception, but it was on Keenan Allen throwing the ball, and not on Caleb Williams. Looking over at the Eagles, though, they're coming off a win in a game where they benched all of their starters and still beat the Giants, because the Giants are terrible. The Eagles, they're a really good team. They didn't need to play their starters. They had clinched the number 2 seed. They are a fantastic team, and nobody really wants to see them in the playoffs. Saquon Barkley's unstoppable. That offense is unbelievable. And if Jalen Hurts is back, I really do think that this team could go really far. That being said, as of right now, Jalen Hurts is still in the concussion protocol, but it's likely he'll play in that game next weekend. So I am going to go with the Eagles to win this game. I wouldn't be surprised if the Packers put up a fight, but seeing as the Eagles won in week 1 when they played, seeing as the Eagles have only gotten better since then, and the Packers have struggled against really, really good NFC teams, I am going to go with the Eagles to win. Moving on, we've got a matchup between the 6-seeded Commanders and the 3-seeded Buccaneers. The Buccaneers, they're coming off a win over the Saints in a game where they needed to win that, because if they lost and the Falcons won, the Falcons would have won the division and made it in over the Bucs. However, the Bucs were able to come back right at the end and win that game, even though they were down for most of that game. They even risked throwing a pass when they had already basically clinched the game and could have ran the clock out to make sure that Mike Evans got his 1,000-yard season, continuing his now 11 seasons in a row to start a career, which is unbelievable. It ties him with Jerry Rice for the most consecutive seasons with 1,000 yards, and he's the only player to ever do it in every single season of their career. He's an unbelievable player, and they threw him that ball, and it got him $1.5 million and that 11th 1,000-yard season. Their defense has some room for improvement. They also have some injuries, but their offense is looking great. When Baker Mayfield's not turning the ball over, they look really good on offense. The Commanders, on the other hand, they're coming off a very tight win over the Cowboys in a game where they didn't play Jaden Daniels for that game. They had Marcus Mariota playing, and he played really well in Jaden Daniels' absence. This game did matter to them because they wanted to clinch the 6th seed, but it didn't matter enough that they wanted to play their starters. So Jaden Daniels was not in. Terry McLaurin was, however, and they were able to come away with a win. Their offenses looked fantastic all season, but really has struggled against the Cowboys. And they were able to overcome that in this game and win the game. Right at the end. They are a really good team, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them go really far in the playoffs. However, they are playing away at the Buccaneers Stadium in Tampa Bay. And so because of that, I do think that it's going to be a very difficult matchup for them. But I think this might be the tightest matchup of any of the matchups on Wild Card Weekend, or at the very least of the NFC matchups, because these teams are very similar. They both have really explosive offenses. They both struggle a little bit on defense, but have good defensive pieces. And so for that reason, I'm quite uncertain with my pick here. However, I am going to go with the Washington Commanders to win this game in what I think will be a very tight matchup, a very offensive-minded game, a very offense-driven game, and what could honestly just be a shootout. But I'm going to go with the Commanders to win and advance to the next round, even though they're away. And finally, in the NFC, our last matchup is between the 5-seeded Vikings and the 4-seeded Rams, after the Vikings just lost the number 1 seed to the Lions. The Vikings and Lions, they were just facing off against each other on Sunday Night Football to determine who gets the 1 seed in the NFC North, and the loser gets the 5 seed, and the Vikings ended up losing that game pretty badly too, 31-9. They did not look good at all. They did not capitalize on any of their red zone trips. Sam Darnold played pretty poorly. They didn't really have much of a passing game, and their defense couldn't hold the Lions because the Lions ended up scoring 31 points. And the Lions' defense looked fantastic, even though the Lions' defense was full of injuries. That speaks pretty poorly against the Vikings' offense. The Rams, on the other hand, they're coming off a loss to the Seahawks in a game where they benched most of their starters, which personally I think was not the smartest move, because now they have to face a much harder opponent in the Vikings because they didn't end up winning that game. Had they won that game, they would have clinched the 3 seed and would be facing off against the Commanders instead of the Vikings. The Rams, though, they're a really good team when they're healthy, when they're starting all their starters. Puka Nacua, Kyron Williams, Cooper Kupp, Matthew Stafford, none of them really played in that game. So having them all for that playoff game and all well rested is going to be way easier for them to win that game, and they still almost beat the Seahawks, even with all of their backups. So the Rams are a pretty good team. I do think this will be a pretty close game, just like it was last time these two teams faced off. And while I do think the Rams stand a really good chance, I think the Vikings bounce back pretty heavy from this poor loss this week. So I am going to go with the Vikings to win this one in what I think will be a really intense game, but I think will end up going down as the Sam Darnold and led Vikings ending up winning and moving on to the next round. Looking over at my power rankings, we're going to go through my top 14 as there are 14 teams left in the playoffs, or 14 teams in the playoffs total. So we're going to go through all of the teams. Starting at number 14, we've got the Steelers. They're really limping their way into the playoffs. They have lost 4 straight. Russell Wilson's not playing very well. The offense really isn't performing. The defense is playing all right, but not up to standard. And so for that reason, they've fallen down to 14. At 13, I've got the Packers. They're also pretty much limping into the playoffs. They've won some pretty important games, but they've lost 5 of their 6 divisional opponent games, and they've lost to the Eagles in week 1, who they're now going to play in the playoffs. Don't have a lot of hope for them to win that game, especially as the 7 seed. So for that reason, they're in at 13. At 12, I've got the Texans. They've been limping most of the season. They did win their division. They are going to have a home playoff game, but that offense has not looked great this year. C.J. Stroud has really struggled. They're missing 2 of their top 3 receivers for the rest of the season, And while that defense is great, that offense really could use some improvement, especially if Joe Mixon can't step up like he hadn't been able to in the most recent few weeks. At 11, I've got the Broncos. They played unbelievable against the Chiefs backups, but they did lose multiple in a row that were winning in games in the previous few weeks. To that, their offense can perform really well, and their defense also can perform really well. In fact, their defense is typically really good, but the offense struggles at times. Bo Nix is playing really well, but he's a rookie, so you got to cut him some slack, but at the same time, not have too high of expectations for that team. At 10, I've got the Buccaneers. They almost lost that game to the Saints that would have almost given the Falcons the division. That being said, the Buccaneers on offense have been really good most of the season. Mike Evans, Baker Mayfield playing really well. Bucky Irving continues to be a really impressive rookie, and that team is just really explosive on offense. But that defense really is not all that great. So for that reason, they're in at 10. At 9, I've got the Rams. When they're playing all their healthy starters, they're really explosive on offense. Their defense is also pretty good, but it's an upcoming team. Their defense is really young. They've got a lot of really young pieces on that defense, and so because of that, I don't have a lot of faith in them in the postseason going up against a lot of experienced teams, but they're still a really good team. At 8, I've got the Chargers. They're really well coached. Their run game is great. Justin Herbert's fantastic. Their defense is great. They're just not one of the best teams left because there are so many teams that are better than them. However, there's really not many flaws with this team. So for that reason, they're in at 8. At 7, I've got the Commanders. I would say their defense is worse than the Chargers, but their offense is better than the Chargers. They're one of the most explosive offenses. Jaden Daniels playing out of his mind this season. Definitely going to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. And he's doing it with minimal weapons on offense. And I do think that they're going to go at least past the first round in the playoffs. At 6, I've got the Vikings. Up until the Sunday Night Football game, I would have had them a lot higher, but they got destroyed by the Lions. They did not look good. Their offense couldn't really do anything. They couldn't capitalize in the red zone, but their defense continues to be really impressive through most of the season. Didn't look that great against the Lions, but the Lions have an unbelievable offense, so it can't really be said anything against the Vikings because the Lions' offense is one of the best, if not the best, in the entire league. But the Vikings' defense, typically really good. Their offense, typically pretty good. But Sam Darnold definitely showing some signs of struggling as he did against the Lions. So for that reason, they fall into 6. At 5, we've got the Ravens. They've been playing unbelievable on offense. Their defense has been continuously improving. They're winning games. They won the AFC North. And now they're playing off against their division rival in the Steelers, who they are 1-1 against on the season. And I can't wait to see another divisional game between them. But I think the Ravens' offense is one of the best, if not the best, in the entire league. Derrick Henry, Lamar Jackson, both playing unbelievable. Lamar Jackson might even win his 3rd MVP. So for that reason, they're in at 5. At 4, I've got the Chiefs. They're not losing games. They have a bye. They're 15 or 14. They're 15-2, and one of those 2 losses was with all of their backups starting. Can't really count this past week against them because it was mainly backups starting. Their defense is unbelievable. Their offense just is not that explosive as they have yet to score 30 points in a game this season. At 3, I've got the Eagles. They've been unbelievable on offense. Saquon Barkley passed 2,000 rushing yards, becoming the 9th running back ever to do that. Their offense, even with Jalen Hurts, when he's healthy, is unbelievable in the passing game. A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, Dallas Goedert, they're all playing really well, and their defense is unbelievable. At 2, I've got the Bills. They are the most explosive team, maybe second to only the Lions, and their offense is unbelievable. The only problem I have with the Bills is their defense can be fluky. It has had some really low lows, such as that Rams game and such as the Lions game. But other than that, the defense hasn't been all too bad, and the Bills' offense is unbelievable. Josh Allen playing at an MVP level. And finally, at number 1, I've got the Lions. The run game, best in the whole league, maybe second to only Saquon or Derrick Henry. But Jahmyr Gibbs playing out of his mind. Jared Goff playing unbelievable. That defense really stepping up even despite all the injuries. And they're just winning games. They have a bye week. They beat the Vikings, who are a fantastic team. And not only did they beat them, but they smacked them down. And they're just a really good team. Not a lot of teams will want to face this Lions team in the playoffs. And for that reason, they're in at number 1. Thank you guys so much for tuning in and listening. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on all my socials on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. And with that, I'll see you guys next time. Enjoy the playoffs. Peace.